Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Sunday afternoon session on From Page to Screen with the one and only Barry Cunningham, OBE. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you.
From wherever you are, I know we've got lots of people attending from all different countries around the world that we've seen. So many of you will have joined us for yesterday's talk on the Times Chicken House competition, and today Barry will be sharing his thoughts and experience and his wisdom on selling film and TV rights and how books are adapted for the screen. Now, how we're going to work today, Barry's really keen to have quite an interactive discussion in as much as we can on Crowdcast. So please get those questions coming in. I'm going to disappear into the corner for a little while and let Barry talk, and then I'll come back and help moderate the questions. So the more questions, the better the session will be, I think. And also, just before we start, I know most of you have been on sessions before. If you're new, we are trying to raise money for Seven Stories, which is the UK charity for children's archive, and they do amazing things for children's literature and just, you know, supporting children and books and things like that. So if you have a chance, as Barry has pointed, there is a donate to Seven Stories button at the bottom of your screen. Please have a look at it, or even have a look at the Crowdcast session on that's being run, I think, this afternoon. Obviously, don't leave this one to go to that one, but you can, of course, register for it and watch it on catch up due to the delights of technology. Now, without any further ado, I'm going to hide away in the corner and hand over to Barry.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Film and television, huge subject, and one of increasing importance to children's books and to readers, as well as viewers everywhere. I've got a new hat from the difference from the old hat yesterday. And I've, you know, many of you know, I've been doing this for some time, and it's certainly true that film and television has radically expanded the market for children's books, widened the market as well. And I go way back to those old days at Penguin when we had books like Watership Down. And for the first time, a children's book became a mass market film and hugely expanded the audience for a children's book, in so much as you had adult editions and children's editions. And from then on, I've kind of worked watching movie adaptations, participating in them, sometimes if I'm lucky, alongside authors. And obviously, I watched the Harry Potter phenomenon turn from books into movies. More recently, I've worked on Maze Runner books, the trilogy there. Our colleagues at Scholastic have seen Hunger Games enormously expand the market for YA in those areas too. And in the old days, film companies were notorious for not welcoming authors, not really wanting authors on set at all, let alone their participation in story development or plot. They thought that was their business, and they wanted authors far away because authors would hate what they're doing to their characters and to their plots. But that gradually changed, and I think a lot of it changed because of Harry Potter, really. Jo was very, very brave, really. And I know that the stories are very familiar, but she hung out for not only that notional editorial control where you have consultation and best practice, she hung out for real control and wouldn't sign a deal until she'd got that, almost to the point of risking the whole deal. Because she wanted that involvement. She wanted to include the way that fans responded to the book in the way that the adaptation worked. And I think that kind of transformed people's attitude, because in film and television, they could see that in endorsing really what they were doing was very important to readers and to the established fan base. So thereafter, in so much as James Dashner appeared in the Maze Runner movies, and the involvement of authors became valued and interesting, and as you look at development and sequels, more and more valued. So I'm going to be talking somewhat about those criteria, kind of what involvement you might hope for, and what kind of qualities film, television are expecting. But I think a lot of people want just a little bit about the bones of how all this works. So you've written a book, it's been successful. You may have a few foreign editions, all of which add to the appeal, because movies, TV, and increasingly the streaming services need that large appeal, that worldwide appeal. So whether you work through an agent, a specialist film and television agent, or your literary agent has a film and television arm, or in our case, in the wonderful case of Chicken House Books, we have Chicken House Entertainment, which represent the rights to a lot of the books we do. And I do the selling of that. So I'm directly in contact with film and television companies, both here and in the United States, to help kind of develop ideas and to look what they're looking for and to try and reflect that in what we introduce to them. So at that point, you'll have heard of options and exciting things like this. So a film or TV company or a production company, very commonly a production company that wants to package your book into a film or television movie and sell on, will option that. So they'll pay a certain amount of money upfront, which gives them the rights to develop that property for a year or 18 months, and it's renewable. And when the deal is eventually done, you can be recompensed in any number of different ways. But normally on an episodic television show, then you'll be paid something per episode. You may even be an executive producer. You may have the chance to write it. On a movie or on a bigger project, sometimes you'll get a share of the profits, which sounds enormously exciting. But again, notoriously, a lot of films never make any profits, because by the time all the deductions to the distributors, to the investors, to the cleaners have been made, there's not a lot left. So if you have a share of net profits, part of my job, it would be to negotiate very strongly what's deducted from those before you get your percentage share of those. If you're a superstar actor, of course, you get a share of what's called the gross profits, which is the huge amount of money at the end of a film's profitability. So lots and lots of different ways to kind of participate in the profitability of a film or a television. Of course, what a lot of people want to do is they want to have the chance of writing the script. And again, a film agent or a TV agent or someone like me will ask for the opportunity for the writer of the book to have a crack at writing the script. Now, if they've never done that before, then sometimes the film or television company will reluctantly say, well, they can have a go. They can certainly write it, but we don't promise to use it. So they can write it on spec to see whether they can do it or not. And a lot of writers want to do that because they want to learn the art of script writing alongside the art of novel writing. So hopefully that's a learning experience. Very occasionally, again, they'll get the opportunity to go ahead and write the script, particularly if it's an independent movie or a low budget movie, they may get that chance. So kind of lots of different business ways of getting into this. And again, part of what a film agent or a literary agent will do is they will also reserve the right to write sequels. And this is often like really important now with the streaming services that we all use, that something will turn into a multi-part series. So the option for the writer of the original story to write sequels would be a very good idea, and something which would be welcomed by them and the market. So kind of what are people looking for? We've worked a lot on developing books into television ideas. and presenting kind of what people are looking for into those ideas. We worked what seems like, it must be about 12 years on a project called Tunnels, which has gone from various TV companies to various TV companies. And we're currently, along with James Nichol, who's a very favourite Golden Egg author, working on the adaptation of Apprentice Witch with the filmmaker there. And we had quite a lot to do with Inkheart, the movie from Cornelia Funke as well. And it's really interesting to look at what film companies are reacting to. And often they're reacting to some of the things that you'll have talked to other people about in terms of your novel work, really. But some are particular. So one of the big particular things is adult characters, of course, but almost every adaptation needs a very good range of adult characters to make the appeal as broad as possible, and to also to give the flavor of that story to the widest possible age group, to the crossover audience. And everybody is looking for those various crossover audiences, whether they're young adults or families. The idea for anything is that more than the narrow age group that perhaps liked your original work will like the adaptation. So they're looking at broadening the scale of that. So adult characters are interesting and important. So developing those as part of your story is never a bad idea, even in bit parts or in background parts. Villains. Now, many of you may have heard of me talking endlessly about villains and villainy, but perhaps what the struggle is against in your book is even more important for film and television. It's even more important to have the face-off and the struggle, whether it's against your Voldemort style villain, or whether it's to do with the kind of more everyday difficulties inside the main characters. So what that struggle is very, very important. So villainy is very important, and the struggle that's represented in those books is very important. Of course, characterization, diversity is also very important. So my camera keeps on wandering away from me, doesn't it? But diversity and a variety of characters is also very important. And the things obviously there to avoid would be to make them too local, too particular to an area, too idiosyncratic in that area, so that those appeals can't be universal. Now, of course, in the old days, it used to be one of the truisms that everything needed to be reset from wherever it was originally portrayed in Europe or Britain to the wider world of the United States. Now, that's really not so important anymore. So you can locate wherever you want. It doesn't have to have token Americans or anything like that in, but it does have to have a diverse range of characters and a diverse way of dealing with that as well. So that's always interesting as well. Now, plot, of course, the big idea. Often what movie people say they're looking for is something which is easily translatable to very quickly in one sentence saying what the novel or the adaptation is about. Now, of course, that can be very difficult. We've been working for some time with a number of different companies on a book by Rachel Ward called Numbers. And Numbers is a terrifying novel. It's a series of 3 novels about a girl who can look into your eyes and see the day you're going to die. And of course, that's an enormously powerful central concept. And it has huge appeal because, of course, it's based on truth. There is a day each one of us is sadly going to die. And would we live our lives any differently if we knew it? How could that change our lives? And of course, it's a huge movie subject. It's a great one to portray to movies, but it's really difficult because how do you see an internal process, something that only means something to the protagonist? How do you visually portray that outside in the ether or in their eyes or above their head? Or how do you do that? How do you make that convincing? So while that's a huge and wonderful single line movie seller, it's also a very difficult one to adapt. And similarly, those kind of issues, it's very helpful if the person selling those rights, the person portraying those, can also have a look at how that might be resolved as well. So as you go about approaching those issues, have a think about that. So, again, the old adage is that it's wonderful to think of the future success of your book, but 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 it's no bad idea to try and work out as well how these things could be portrayed more widely. Because it's undoubtedly true that the popularity of modern children's books can be vastly expanded through adaptations. It can bring a wider range into your books, and it can really, really introduce them to a huge and mighty international audience. And again, we can build off that into continuing franchises. And again, that is what everyone's looking for. They're looking for franchises. Single ideas are great and sometimes can be very powerful. But like Harry Potter, like Maze Runner, like Hunger Games, they're looking for ideas that can carry on growing, carry on adapting. So when your editors often say to you, where do you think this story is going? How do you think of sequels? Then it's no bad idea to think beyond the consequences of how you're writing, where it's going, how sequels and further adventures can build from that. So that's never a bad idea. Backstories are also important. Again, one of the most common things that authors are asked as we work with them developing ideas for film and television is how the backstory works. Where do these people come from? What's their motivation in getting to the place they are? How did they come across these difficulties and how did they deal with them? So working out those backstories are really important as well. And often editors in books will ask you about those, and we won't use them in the book itself, but again, you'll know them when asked. And again, that's one of the enormous strengths that books have over other forms of media, because that you can build a character in far more depth in a novel together with its backstory, so that you come to that not just based on dialogue, but based on the novel that you've created. So again, think about that. Think about where your story comes from, and as I've said, where your story's going to. Sometimes things don't work out for us. We thought that having sold really a large number of the books that we worked on, we can develop it ourselves. And we thought that by using a very, very talented author, we could start developing our own movie options, developing our own sales, really. So many of you will know Lucy Christopher, a wonderful YA writer and in fact middle grade writer who teaches at Bath at the moment. And her novel Stolen has been a huge hit for us. It's a huge hit in Australia, a huge hit in the United States where it won the Prince Prize. Very big hit here. And it's about a girl who is essentially kidnapped in some very strange circumstances and kept isolated in the wilds of the Australian outback. And her captor says, and tries to convince her really, that I haven't kidnapped you, I haven't stolen you away, I've rescued you. I've rescued you from the life that you led. And she almost, and we almost come to believe him. Um, but of course, in the end, he's brought to justice. And again, the end of a story like that is difficult enough in the book, because he's committed a crime, he's kidnapped her, they've had this intimate relationship, this terribly emotional relationship. But as a novelist, she wanted, and we wanted, to show that there are consequences for that kind of action. But bizarrely, all over the world, after we published it, we got a huge number of fan letters, people who love the book, but who wanted them to get together. They wanted the kidnapper and the kidnappee, if that's a word, to get together, and to have a happy ending. Um, so so that's kind of what we went along with. Even though years later, Lucy has been busy writing a sequel about what actually happened when he was let out of jail and she met him again. But for the movie, we were infinitely worried about how this would go. But we thought, you know what, we can do this. So we got Lucy to write the script. We got a very famous Australian director, loved it, but wanted to shoot it in a particular way, which we weren't big fans of. We had a long debate about what would happen with that. Lots of different interpretations of what would happen as a result of that relationship. And we decided to try and raise the money for it ourselves. So we went out and we got quite a lot of backing, but we didn't get that patchwork of backing that you needed to actually go to shoot it independently. Although we mapped out the locations and Lucy wrote a great script and everything. And part of the hiccup was, again, who this story was going to be for. Whether it was for its original YA audience, or whether it was for an adult audience, whether it was a kind of thriller, or was a lot of this relationship again happening in our head, so it'd be different to portray. And because we hadn't solved any of those things really, we stumbled on getting it. And it's often that we spend a long time with filmmakers, particularly at the moment with Apprentice Witch, which started off in one way, but is looking now to develop in a completely different way by using all kinds of dramatizations mixed with animations. So the way a story gets interpreted is enormously interesting and enormously involving, in a sense that nowadays filmmakers and people who make television programs, particularly streaming programs, particularly companies like Netflix, who want something to go on and on and on, want us to help develop the story, where it's going, and how it's going to be building. All those things that I mentioned, like sequels and backstories, and trying to analyze who the villain actually is, all those things become really important. And I think the involvement now in writers in that process to begin with is just as important as that process of development. And again, very different worlds from the old days and from how you thought about it. So a lot of people ask about scripts themselves, whether attempting a script would be a good idea at the same time as representing a book. Largely, I would say no. Largely, I would leave that to the script writers, but to do address those things that I thought to mention already. Currently, I think companies like Netflix, Hulu, the new streaming services from Warner and things, are all looking for great children's content that develops and is capable of repeat dramatic series. And so it's a very good time, and it's never too early. We tend to go out on the material that we control for Chicken House Entertainment, we tend to go out way before we publish it, because what the holy grail of this, and we've approached the holy grail a couple of times, is to develop a film adaptation at the same time we develop the publishing. So we develop the publishing alongside great ideas from film and television makers about how they would like to portray a character and how they would like to develop that character. And again, in our experience with books like Tunnels, people have had wonderful ideas for scripts that I wish we thought of when we were developing the original book series. They've got great ideas of where things can go, how characters can be portrayed in a different way. And that would be a wonderful form of collaboration, one that I would love to do from the start of developing a book series or a YA series, particularly about how that would go. We are developing something with Heyday Television now, the Harry Potter producers, with a new young adult novel. And I'm really excited about that because we have started early enough and they have got already some great script ideas of where that novel could go next. And the author is very excited about that as well. So that's kind of what I really would love to do, to have this as a properly interactive process where we can meld publishing and broadcasting together, and we wouldn't just be selling something on and leaving people to it, as it were, and hoping for the best, which is sometimes the position you're in. So that's kind of broadly the market. And I think, Vicky, we're going to ask for any questions at this point, that we can develop any bits of those that we'd like to talk about.
Yes, thank you very much, Barry. That I've made loads of notes, and I'm not a note taker, so that's a really good sign. I think it's really interesting, that last comment that you just had, because one of the things that you talked about yesterday with the Times Chicken House competition was that you didn't need the manuscript to be completely polished. That maybe that's one of the reasons why, because you want to be able to help craft that into the right project. Would that
Yes, and that's doubly true of film and television as well. While they like the reassurance of an international publishing success, of course, so that a book's already been published and is already a big hit in its various markets, that gives them some comfort that in markets like Britain and Germany, who are big movie markets, Japan and China, actually more important for them is to be able to meld that story into a really good either single movie or franchise. So they enjoy the involvement early on as well. And they are as well very used to reading material at an early stage and would prefer to do that. Obviously, we try and match then the particular film company or film production company up with the writer. They would much prefer to start developing that rather than wait to have to compete in a big open market after a book's been published. So often we find ourselves talking. I'm talking to someone now, actually, really interestingly, about a book which we're not going to publish for 4 or 5 months. And they've already got really cool ideas about the setting, which we're very tempted to think about again already. So yeah, that is absolutely true of everybody who works in the media. It's the idea, the plot, the villainy, the struggle, and if possible, how you portray that concisely and emotionally. Again, so I was saying yesterday about emotional impact of stories. You want to feel the joy in a story, you want to feel the pain as well. And that really, really helps if you can get that over early enough in film and television.
Yep. Okay, I'm just going to get my head around the questions. Just one more from me. How much do you think things like Netflix and Amazon and the streaming TV, how much has that changed the game for children's book writers, or has it? Do you think?
I think I think it's an interesting process, and I think it's still unproven because of the huge variety of possible platforms. The audiences are more fragmented, really. We are just about to participate with Sky on their big half-term movie, which is an animated version of Cornelia Funke's Dragon Rider, which was made by Constantin Films in Germany, who made Neverending Story. And they are premiering on Sky pay-per-view at Easter time in February half term. And because Sky is such a big platform, and because that movie will then carry on repeating throughout the year, you've got an enormous children's platform for this particular book, which again, because it's an animation, is much wider than the original printed novel, because it goes much younger in its appeal and also as old as the novel is. So for a platform like that, that's huge. Whereas Netflix is very, very full of material, and some of the audience, they won't ever reveal audience numbers, but some of the audiences are not necessarily as big as others. So for children's books that are adapted on the streaming services, you're never quite sure who you are reaching, and you're never quite sure in what numbers. But I would say that on children's books over the last 10 years or so, the interest in children's adaptions has enormously grown. It's still quite difficult to see children's movies being made, but now the huge new impact of the streaming services means there'll be lots more children's content available, sadly, particularly now because of lockdown and so on. So I think it's just at the beginning of really changing the game. It's always changed the game for those big kind of tentpole movies like Hunger Games and Maze Runner. But I think now we're going to see it really having a big influence on a lot of other things. And because they really prefer to adapt book content, I think it's great for the audience that's listening today. I think that they're really looking for a much wider range. They're not scared of YA either, in the same way that some traditional BBC broadcasters have been, because they don't have the time slots. But nowadays, because you're not governed by the tea time slot, you're not governed by children's television time, you can watch at any time of the day, then again, that frees up content levels in a way that the BBC was always very conservative about buying into children's slots, very definitive. But now, maybe the BBC will turn into another streaming service where watching on demand will have a big difference as well. So I think it's really good for all of us. And again, because of all those things that this is a long answer, isn't it? But all those things we've talked about, like backstory and proper characters, with development and backstory and futures, then I think books are way ahead because they've done a lot of the work of dramatization. They've done a lot of the thinking, and they've done a fair amount of the trying out as well. So yeah, so I think we're just at the beginning of big changes, and I think that they'll continue to have enormous influence on children's books, and I love that. I think books are great. I mean, the old adage was, if it's not a good adaptation, then it'll drive people to the book. And if it is a good adaptation, it'll drive people to the book. And I think that's true. I think that's true. I don't think we've got anything to lose. I think we've got lots of readership to gain. And I think that the reading experience can be not dissimilar to the enjoying of the experience played out before you, both in audiobooks, which are, again, having a big boom, but in the world of increasingly various TV and streaming adaptations of children's books.
Okay, we've got lots of questions here. This one from Catherine. Catherine's asked, who recommends your novel to be made into a drama or film? Or does it just happen upon by some creative genius who thinks, wow, this would be epic on screen?
Yeah, well, it is us. It is it is the agents, the publishers. I spend quite a lot of time talking to film and television people about what I think would be a good idea. And quite a lot of pitching goes on. You've heard of the elevator pitch for books. Well, that's even more difficult for film and television, because we're not often talking about the literary merit. We're just literally talking about the story appeal of those stories. So we're saying this will appeal to this part of the audience. This is perfect for this part of the audience. But more than often, in fact, very often, somebody will come to me, and it's not because of my highly professional pitches. It's not because an agent has made a wonderful content over lunch and pitched the wonderful idea. It's because someone's child has enjoyed it at school. Someone's teacher has told them about it. They've heard it from a play group. It's that various. So it comes in all kinds of guises. But most often it's by somebody who is passionate about having read the story in some way, and just is busy talking about it.
That's great. Question from Alison. Do authors get the option of writing the screenplay for their own book, or do they have to ask for it?
They have to ask for it. Often I'll ask for it, obviously having checked that with them. Obviously, I will ask for it on their behalf. So I will say, yes, that's great. We'll do the deal. We'll do the option. But will you give the author the first chance to write the screenplay? And often filmmakers will say, well, we're not going to pay for it. We don't know if they can do it. So we'll give them the option to pitch for it, and they can write it if they want, and we'll judge and feed back. Sometimes if an author has got experience, we'll say, we absolutely want first option for them to write it. But unless they've got specific screenwriting experience, mostly that's not easy to get. But they probably will give you a chance to write it on spec and to see what they think of your work.
Okay, this one's, why do script writers change the endings of so many stories?
Wow, endings are really difficult, aren't they? I spent all my professional editorial life talking about beginning and endings. Where a story ends is often kind of arbitrary, and I've never met a child who believes the story has actually ended where you told them it ends, or in fact it's begun where it began. Everybody believes that the story carries on, don't they? And you just happen to stop it. I used to have big arguments with Kevin Brooks, who's a great YA writer, and he would just stop the book, and I'd say, well, we've got to have some kind of climax, some kind of resolution. And he would say to me, well, that's not what life's like. Life just carries on. Just because, this bit of the story stops, it doesn't mean that the overall story stops. So part of the interesting work that filmmakers put into programs is to decide how a story will end. And often the way it ends in a book is not where they think it best ends in a movie. Either it's not dramatic enough, or it doesn't feed on to the next story, or in their view, it doesn't form, the famous 5-act structure of a film or television. It doesn't come to a resolution of the television dramatization or the film dramatization. It doesn't pull enough strands together that they've played out in film and TV terms. So I think that's the easy answer. Of course, it can be much more annoying than that, that the scriptwriter or the lead actor doesn't want it to end there. And there are lots of people that work on that. And often movies are tried out in front of test audiences, and test audiences don't like endings notoriously. And sometimes, I think, as in that science fiction book, they shoot 2 different endings, don't they? And they decide later which one to use. And I know that's relatively common, that for some especially expensive movies, they'll shoot 2 or 3 endings to decide what works. In classic film terms, they shot 2 different endings of Casablanca and decided which one to use. One she stays and one she goes. So it's not unusual, and I think it's quite creative often.
Okay, this one from Esther. Are there things we should keep in mind in the process of writing a book that make it more likely that a book will be turned into a film?
I think the bigger the idea, really, I think that if there is something which is life or death, which is a big threat, which is, in Philip Pullman's famous terms, it's kind of about good and evil. It's about a resolution of something. Then, if you can demonstrate what your book's about in a dramatic, one sentence structure, then I think that has that goes some of the way. A great villain goes some of the way, perhaps more of the way than a great hero. The emotional intensity of the story needs to have some consequence, I think, as well. So, kind of all those kind of big things, I think, help. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's very difficult, isn't it? Sometimes big things can be small things. They can be just the struggle to overcome a difficulty at school, which is then resolved in an interesting way, or it can be um, to have a kind of extrasensory element. And again, I think those two levels often help. So a practical, dramatic play out and a supernatural extrasensory element, or an unexpected twist which plays for children off something which is a little magical or a little mysterious. Again, those extra elements help. So yeah, I mean, most of the things that go to make up a great story, actually.
Okay, next question. We're getting through them. This one from Joe. I once went to a talk from a CBBC leader, and she said they tended to focus on long form episodic series. Are there any specific formats that are favoured for different age ranges and or genres?
Well, I think that conventionally the BBC has done that episodic format, which is a television half an hour, which is different in commercial television to a commercial half an hour. Half an hour or 40 minutes seems to be the best one on that. But people like Netflix now are trying to develop more spectacular formats. So you'd have something that starts with an hour and then maybe goes on to another hour, another 45 minutes an hour. So I think formats are getting slightly longer in terms of streaming, but younger children, I guess, or I mean, I don't know so much about those very young um, children's BBC series, which are just cartoon 15 minutes and things like that. But I think half an hour to 40 minutes is a favoured commercial half hour length, as it were. So yeah, those seem to be the most popular formats. Although I think they're getting older, longer.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Um, this one from Alison. With transposing fantasy worlds from page to screen, how much is the original author's vision and how much the screenwriters or directors?
Again, I think it's very various, but I think that I think the director normally, because they'll only come onto a series or a film if they truly believe that they can bring something to it themselves. So I think it's the director's vision. Script writing, any of you who ever worked with a script writer, and we sometimes go the other way, you know. We took the script of Billy Elliot, um, and we gave the script to Melvin Burgess to write a novel from the script, and the script writer and Melvin worked together on that. So occasionally we do go in the other direction, and we've adapted uh, various scripts to book length form. So we do go the other way. So script writers are fantastic to work with. I am getting to your point. Scriptwriters are fantastic to work with because they're used to changing things overnight. So script writing is very malleable format. So the director or an actor or something will be playing out in terms of the filming, which isn't working. And they'll say to the scriptwriter, either during shooting or before shooting, we want that whole thing changed. And they'll do it overnight. So it's generally script writing isn't generally something which is not changeable. So it's really the director's view of what they want, which has the most influence. And I'm always terrified and surprised that you reach the stage of something being shot, vast numbers sometimes of extras, cameras, everything else like that. And they shoot it without a complete script. Okay. So they will go into something and then they will rewrite parts on the day and give actors new pages. And we were working on Inkheart with at that time New Line Pictures. And we weren't involved in anything really, just talking about the books and giving some advice on characters. And they came up with some great ideas to visually represent various aspects of that book, but they hadn't written an overall explanation. So they were just about to shoot it, and they said, "We have to do a voiceover, just explaining where we are. Can we write that now?" So we sat down with them and wrote it with them on the day they were going to use it. And it always shocks me how kind of workshoppy making these things it is. And an actor will sometimes say, this line doesn't work. It just doesn't make sense. Can we change it? And that's kind of fun and part of the creative process. And so I think it is largely down to the director's vision. I think that every author that I've ever worked with takes a deep breath at the beginning of this and has to realize that while they can have influence and they are listened to now more than they were before, it's not their work. This is a film, which is very different, or a TV series, and they have to let it go because it has to exist. And it all's going back to where things end and begin. It has to exist in its own artistic space. So it has to work as a movie, it has to work as a TV series. And an author has to say, well, that's them, it's different from my book. It's inspired by my book, but it's not the same thing. It's almost certain that it will not appear as it is in my mind. It'll appear as it appears in the director's mind and in the actor's mind. And those are the people that I have to trust. So, of course, you want to trust them to do a job which is not going to be the same as yours, but you'll respect whatever it is. But I think it's very unusual. In fact, I can't offhand think of an author who loved the film or television adaptation. They always had reservations. I worked with Mary Norton ages ago, and she not only wrote The Borrowers, but she sold Bedknobs and Broomsticks to Disney. And she would just coldly shiver because Bedknobs and Broomsticks was very different, but again interpreted through a very different light, and a lot of people adored it. So again, they are different. I don't think you can expect them to continue a literary vision into film or television.
Great, thank you. Questions still coming in. We certainly aren't going to get through them all, everybody. I'm so sorry, but we'll try and get through as many as we can. How much do publishers think about TV and film adaptation when they're looking to buy a manuscript? That's from Leonie.
I don't think enough, really. And I don't think they start talking enough, because a lot of publishers and a lot of literary agents use film and television agents. So they kind of think it's their job. And, they'll do the publishing of the book and they'll do the developing of the career. But actually, because these things are, they're so much fun apart from anything else, and they're so interesting. I think it's worth thinking about these things early on, and we certainly do at Chicken House. We don't kind of let that dominate the editorial process or anything, but we start thinking about it early on. And in the way that we design the book, in the way that we start talking about the book, we'll start talking to scouts and film and television people quite early on in a book's career. And obviously, we want the series to develop. And like I said, my holy grail, which nearly comes about sometimes, is that after we publish the first book, the second and third ones, or the way a story develops, will go hand in hand with a film and television adaptation, because again, we can always use a different form of creative input. So we think about it. We think about it a lot, but we don't let it spoil a book. I mean, we wouldn't think, well, because that's not a filmic idea, it's a purely literary idea. That's not going to stop us working or publishing a book. But it is, I think, now, because we work with children, and for children, it's all the same day, isn't it? It's like what you watch on television, what you watch on your computer, what you read, what you listen to, the BBC Sounds thing that you hear in your story time, the way dialogue works. And again, I think we've been influenced in publishing by the way dialogue works in film and television, because film and television needs to tell the whole story through dialogue. And again, I think we've learned from that we can't just describe stuff, we have to show stuff. So I think film and television has shown us that showing things is very important, and the way that people speak and the dialogue that they use is very important to young people. So I think from that point of view, we've taken some lessons on board. So we do kind of think about that, particularly in the way that people kind of show their characters through speech. So there is I like this cross-fertilization. Of course, there are disasters. There are terrible film and television adaptations of outstanding books. And that happens. But it's an interesting development, if nothing else.
Okay, great. We are down to our last 10 minutes, everyone. This time has flown by. Someone said, do you handle video game adaptations too?
No, but I often think about that. Again, when we've been working, I think 6 years, I might have mentioned, on tunnels with various developments, big thing. Because it's basically an underground adventure. They go underneath the ground and they continue going underground. They find things. It's a levels type of adventure. So we did talk to a couple of games companies right at the beginning. And again, they said something which kind of echoes a lot of the things we've been saying. They're saying that most film adaptations come to them very late in the day to do game spin-offs. So they basically have to adapt an existing piece of software, an existing machine game. But if somebody came to them early enough, they could develop something more original and interesting. So I do think that we should be thinking about that perhaps a bit more than we do, a bit earlier than we do. Again, we tend to leave those rights with the film company. And the film company tend to try and buy those rights early on. But perhaps it's an area that we don't fully understand. And certainly, the British gaming industry, as you know, is bigger than the British film industry. So perhaps it is an area that we don't pay enough attention to, and we should think about more.
That's great. Thank you. A cheeky question. How many hats do you own? P.S. They're lovely. That's from Leo.
Yes, I have lots of hats, actually. I've always loved hats because they're a bit like pockets, aren't they? You can, there's always stuff you can do with them. I have got a fair number of different hats. This one I think comes from Africa. This one, yes, but I love a hat.
Hats are very important. Okay, this one from David. It's obviously a pipe dream, but if I got a book published and someone wanted to film it, I'd be really worried about the editing of the LGBTQ elements. Does an author have control over how representation is delivered in adaptations?
Again, it's a matter of finding the right partners. But nowadays, as opposed to you know, when I first started working in this industry, people are much, much more sensitive and would absolutely, because they don't want any bad publicity from the author. You know, they don't want to run foul of the existing audience. So they would be careful, I think, nowadays about that. Occasionally, you know, they do propose radical reinterpretations of characterizations, but I think nowadays, you know, they've learned to be more careful of those things. So I don't think it's a worry these days. But again, right at the beginning of the negotiations, of course, we don't film and television agents, your literary agent, they would never do something that you weren't consulted by. So they would consult you and you get a chance to talk to the TV company to get some reassurances about that. And, you know, you wouldn't have to, obviously, you wouldn't have to go with them unless they did assure you. And they wouldn't want to run foul of poor publicity from the author of the work.
I think we've just got time for about one more. Have you ever had a book submitted to you that you've just immediately thought, this is a film or a TV?
Yeah, I have. I did think numbers. I have to say, despite the difficulty of the visualization, I really thought numbers was an absolute cracking idea. And the book that we just sold to Hayward, again, I thought I can't talk about it because I'm not allowed to, but it is an absolutely cracking idea. And I think in YA sometimes you have those dilemmas, those futuristic, those, you know, I love books in YA with just a crack in the mirror. You know, everything is normal except one big thing is not, and that transforms everyone's lives. And I think those are the ones. I've also we've just published a book called The Marvelous Story of Snurgs, which is a rewriting by Veronica Costantelli of an Edwardian classic, and it's inspired Tolkien. And he publicly said the Hobbits were inspired by these people. And again, I just sometimes a little bit of folklore, a little bit of invented fairy tale. You just know is ideal, and that's been snapped up by a British television company already. So yeah, I mean, I don't that's not part of why I publish a book, but it adds to my excitement sometimes of saying, well, I've just got to find the right person to make this even bigger in film and television terms. So yeah, but sometimes you're surprised. You know, sometimes a book will go for a film and television adaptation that you never imagined. You thought it was too complicated or too difficult, and sometimes that will happen, and they will see something which is filmic, that you didn't see properly. So it's a glorious thing, and it's part of the excitement of publishing, because we are together with you guys. We're creating something that we put out, and it can have all kinds of consequences. It can have consequences to readers, to the audience, to audio, to film, to television. Putting these stories out, sometimes they have different kinds of life, and I think that's really exciting, and I think we should welcome it.
Okay, well, I'm not sure if we've got time for any more questions, because it's very hard to see if there's one here that we can do. Well, oh, what about this one? Are there any particular considerations or issues for books that focus on an animal point of view? That is from Catherine.
Yeah. Well, I love animal stories, you probably heard before. So I don't think there is. We published something called White Fox, which is from a Chinese writer, very different Chinese folklore, and that's just been optioned in China to make a story from the animal's point of view, the animal who wants to transform to a human. And like Watership Down, I think I would like to do more animal stories which could translate. You know, those great classics, Call of the Wild, books that are from an animal point of view, but are universal in the extent. And nowadays, of course, even more important because of the way that animals are victimized in our environment. So yeah, no, I don't think so. I think an animal voice would be cool. Of course, it's difficult to pull off. It's difficult to make that anthropomorphic move sometimes, that doesn't trivialize the animal experience or overemphasize the human experience. So it's difficult. But of course, most cartoons are based on that, and most of the famous Disney ones are rerun from an animal point of view. So yeah, there's lots there. I think there's lots there.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, everyone, but we do have to wrap up now. So, Barry, can I just say thank you again for such an inspiring and informative session. It has been a privilege to host you today at this conference session and learn from you. And hopefully, one day, as many of us are thinking, we'll be there with the Netflix deal. Or Apple TV. I'm not fussy.
No,
But yeah. So we'll just say thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon.
thank you, Hong Conference. Thank you, Golden Egg. Been a pleasure.
And
Thanks.
everyone, don't forget 7 Stories. Please check it out and hopefully make a donation if you can. Thanks again. Bye.
Bye.